Hello and welcome to another episode of Community Connections. I am your host, Anna Orr, and we are talking all things autism. We're talking advocacy, support, and education. Today's guest is Maren Christensen Hofer. She is Executive Director at MAN. That stands for the Multicultural Autism Action Network. We are going to provide, hopefully, some resources for you and someone you love in your network that is dealing with autism or may be neurodivergent. This is going to be a really good episode and something you won't want to miss. I'm so excited, Maren, to have you joining me today for April as we celebrate Autism Acceptance Month. Can you talk to me about your organization and the work of the Multicultural Autism Action Network?
It is such a pleasure to be here, and thank you so much for inviting us. As you mentioned, my name is Maren Christensen Hofer, and I serve as the Executive Director for a nonprofit organization called the Multicultural Autism Action Network. And this is an organization that was founded by parents of autistic children from the Somali and Oromo and African American communities, specifically to serve the needs of those communities and help parents of children with autism and all types of disabilities navigate services and supports for their kids.
Can you talk about what the work of MAN actually looks like day to day in the communities in which you serve?
Absolutely. Yeah, so we offer a number of different types of programming, all focused on meeting the needs of families in the communities we serve. And that might look like, offering trainings to families about how to navigate school services or how to apply for a personal care attendant through your county. It might look like, some one-to-one support if a family wants someone to go with them to a doctor's office or to an assessment, or needs some help troubleshooting, a letter they may have received in the mail and need to fill out some paperwork. We also do a lot of work around advocacy, working at the legislature and working at the state and local level to bring families to the table from diverse communities to make sure that their voices are represented and really kind of smooth the path for their participation in decision-making processes about, the policies that affect their families.
Can you talk a bit about your personal connection with autism for those that are unfamiliar? Well, first, let's slow down. Let's backtrack a little bit. Can you talk about what autism is for viewers that are unfamiliar or for people that may have heard this term but don't necessarily know what it actually means?
Yeah, that is a really great question and one that we talk about quite a bit. Because there isn't a specific word for autism in many of the communities that we serve. So what autism is specifically is a neurodevelopmental disability. It may look like differences in the way people communicate. It's not uncommon for autistic children to develop speech quite late and sometimes not at all. It's not uncommon for children who are autistic to have different ways of sensory processing. So maybe sensitive to light or touch or sensory seeking in different ways. Autism can also bring with it some challenges around social communication, things like reading nonverbal cues or sort of understanding the subtlety of nonverbal communication can be challenging. So often autism, can be identified quite young in children. And with early support and understanding, autistic children can live wonderful and happy lives, but it can also be, challenging sometimes. So our role is really to help families access those services and supports that they need to understand their children's needs.
Absolutely. Now, Governor Walz deemed April 2023 as Autism Acceptance Month. It was traditionally known as Autism Awareness Month. And I think it's important to talk about that because we hear so much that people are aware of what autism is, but acceptance is the key, and it's very important. We're all dealing with something. And so I think it's important not to just look at that, but look at that, the diagnosis, but to see a person beyond that and then provide support. Can you talk about what that's meant thus far to MAN as you guys navigate the work that you do in these important communities?
Yeah, that's such a great point, and we really appreciate Governor Walz making that distinction. From our perspective, I'm the parent of a child who is autistic myself, and so that's kind of the lens that I bring to this work. And for me, it's not really about just being aware of his differences and his disability. It's about being accepting of them and welcoming him as the person he is, rather than trying to change him into something that he's not. And for me and my own parenting journey, like that was really the key, my own sort of lens shift to getting him the support that he needed, and going from a place of trying to cure or treat or make him into a person who's not autistic, but rather just supporting him for the child that he is.
Absolutely. According to the CDC, it says that 1 in 34 Minnesotans are autistic. So when we hear that, I think that really puts into perspective how impactful to our communities and to our families this is of an issue, and how we need to come alongside one another and provide support, like you said, not only on a one-on-one level, but for them at large that are dealing with this. Can you talk to me about how you've tried to navigate that experience personally, but also with your son day to day?
Yeah. Well, when my son was first diagnosed, we received a lot of the messages about, his deficits and the things that he couldn't do, and, how much therapy we needed to get him involved in at a very early age. And I think we kind of bought into that message about needing to fix him or change him. But I think that the evolution that we've kind of made in our thinking and that we try to share with the families that we serve is, it's not really about changing your child into someone different. It's about supporting them for who they are and really understanding what's challenging for them, understanding those differences in sensory processing, understanding that some of our kids, may need to move their bodies, understanding that for some of our kids, they pay attention best when they're not sitting still, when they're moving around. And really figuring out, what our task is as parents in supporting our children. So that's really kind of the work that we're trying to do, is helping families navigate those systems and services in a way that's not only culturally affirming to them as, families from multicultural families, communities, but also, affirming their child's neurodiversity and helping them be the best person that they can be, as who they are, being an autistic child or, a non-autistic child, really meeting where they are and trying to provide that support.
Absolutely. When did you notice in your son that maybe he may be dealing with something?
Yeah, the first time that we noticed maybe something was a little bit different was when we sent our child to preschool. And he had a very hard time of that. And it's not an uncommon experience for very young children on the autism spectrum to be asked to leave preschool or a daycare or, early learning setting, just because people feel like they can't meet their needs. My son was often very dysregulated at school and just had a really hard time being there. And I know now that what was going on is he was having a really hard time with sensory processing issues, like being in a classroom with a number of other children close to his physical space was really hard for him. Not getting the sensory input that he needed was really hard for him. And at the time, we didn't really have the tools to understand how to support him. So that was sort of our first clue that there might be something a little bit different going on. Autism was not on my radar at all when someone suggested to us that we have an assessment done. But it was kind of through that assessment process that we learned that he was autistic, and we were able to seek out some of the services and supports for him. And for many families, that's a really hard thing to hear. Many families greet that information with fear or worry. That is not always a welcome message. And again, our organization tries to do the work of just letting families know they're not alone in this. There are many of us that have walked this path before, and I had the privilege of connecting with other families that, had diagnoses long before mine, and that certainly made our journey much easier. And that's what we're trying to do for other families, is help them along that path as well.
You spoke about MAN being founded in 2016 by parents that wanted to not only support their kids and other parents, but provide resources and different things like that. How have you seen the growth from 2016 to now, and the stigma start to change or with parents as well as the community at large around autism?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And there's certainly still a lot of stigma around disability. Everywhere we look, we see that. But there are a lot more tools available to families. When the organization was founded in 2016, I don't know that there were any support groups for families meeting in Somali or Oromo language. I don't know that there were any trainings for family in Oromo or Somali language. There just wasn't a lot of resources specifically designed for diverse communities. But today we see, there's probably 5 or 6 different organizations that are kind of doing that work. And when we kind of combine together and pool our resources, then that gives us an even stronger voice with some of the counties, the state agencies, the Department of Human Service, the Department of Education, to really make sure that people are thinking about, like, what does this look like for a family from the Oromo community? How do they access this information? Are we making sure that there is a place at the table for these families to express, what they're dealing with and their frustrations and how we can make these systems better?
I'm excited to have this conversation, not only to provide information and resources, but to also educate parents and people in the community about what autism looks like, and if they are encountering someone that is autistic, how to best support them. I think that takes away not only the stigma, but it also starts to incorporate a sense of normalcy for everyone. I don't think that it should be a hindrance because you find out that a child is autistic. That stops you from engaging or trying to help them navigate a very daunting world at times. Can you talk to me about some of the symptoms or some things that you started to notice in your child that had you begin to look for more answers outside of traditional treatment?
Yeah, absolutely. So some of the signs that we might see early on could be like differences in communication, children that are not speaking until a little bit later, or differences in the way they speak. One very common thing with autistic children is to use what's called echolalia, which is instead of putting together independent sentences to maybe repeat a script that they've heard from a video or a favorite movie or a book or something. And that is a form of communication. It's a perfectly valid form of communication, but it may not sound like what we would typically expect from a toddler or 2-year-old in the way that they're communicating. So that might be one sign that you might see. Another would be differences in the way children play with things. We might think of a child, playing with toy trucks or something, modeling them driving around on the road. You might see a child like really interested in lining their toys up by color or sorting them in a certain way. They might be really interested in the way a toy moves and be really kind of focused intensely on that. And again, it's not that one way of playing is right or wrong. It's just that we notice some of those differences. I think the sensory processing piece is another one that maybe we're not always as attuned to, but can be a very early sign. If you notice that your child is really sensitive to light or sound or scratchy clothing or textures in food or something like that, that might be a sign of some sensory processing differences.
When does autism usually appear? I know you spoke about recognizing it in your child when your child went to preschool.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But if there's somebody out there that says, I think I may have a family member that's older than that, that may be dealing with some sensory issues, or like you said, focusing on certain things, a way a toy moves, or maybe things like that. Can you kind of talk about when traditionally it appears?
Well, we do have the ability to diagnose children with autism, as young as 18 months, and there are some studies going on that, even move the age earlier than that. But it's not uncommon at all for people to, grow into adulthood without a diagnosis. Another phenomenon that's quite common is for an adult, a parent, to be going through the process of getting a diagnosis for their child and to realize that they themselves have a lot of those differences. Autism is genetic, so it's not uncommon for parents to recognize some of those signs in themselves as their child is going through the diagnostic process. But I guess my message is it's never too late, and it's not a bad thing to have a diagnosis, because once you have that information, then you can really figure out, what are those supports that I or my child need? What are those things that would be helpful? We have one member of our team who received her own autism diagnosis after her children had been diagnosed. And for her, it was really kind of a life-changing revelation. Things that she had struggled with throughout her entire life sort of made sense in a way that they hadn't before. So we always encourage people to seek out that diagnosis. If some of what you're hearing for your child rings true for yourself, that's a welcome piece of information and not something to be feared.
I was just reading on the Center for Disease Control website that autism is the fastest growing developmental disability in the world today, increasing at a rate of 10 to 17%.
Mm-hmm.
So this is not as far away of a concept
Yeah.
to understand that this is really affecting people in our own communities, in our families. And like you said, how many people are going undiagnosed later in life?
Yeah.
I'm grateful now to hear that we're able to provide this support for children in our communities. Can you talk to me about the work of MAN with parents and kind of addressing stigma in the Somali and Oromo community?
Yeah, well, that's something that we feel very strongly about, and really try to work on those issues around stigma. But obviously, changing community ideas about things is a big undertaking, and that's a large task and something that we all need to work on together. That is not just the work of people with disabilities or parents of children with autism. But one of the things that we've done in the past is to have some community conversations where we bring autistic adults in and hand them the microphone to talk about their experience. And finding people in the Somali community, in the Oromo community, that are comfortable talking about their diagnosis and really kind of demystifying the whole thing. There are a number of advocates now that are talking about their own experience. And I think, we have it's easy to stigmatize something that we fear, but often that fear just comes from not knowing. So if we can bring that knowledge into the community and tell that story and make it something that feels a little less unknown, that's really important, I think, to work on that issue around stigma. And I think, it's important for all of us to just look around our community and see, who are the parents of children with disabilities? Who are the children with disabilities? What are we doing to make them feel welcome and supported and included in our communities? And that's work that we all need to do.
Absolutely. Can you talk to me about how you all were assessed for the diagnosis that your child was autistic?
Yeah.
What that process was.
That's a really great question. There are kind of two different pathways to obtaining services and support with an autism diagnosis. One is through a school, and that's a school assessment, which can lead to things like an IEP, an individualized education program in school. And then the other pathway is a medical diagnosis, which is something a little bit different, and that's usually done by a psychologist or a developmental pediatrician. That leads to, a formal medical diagnosis of autism. And that can be a pathway to things like PCA supports or grants or waivers or occupational therapy, speech therapy, other types of formal medical therapies. And both are very important, but they're two separate things. And that's one of the things that we really try to teach families, is it can be very beneficial to get both.
Okay. Traditionally, is autism something that people can grow out of? I know often we hear people say things like, that they're just quirky. They'll eventually grow out of it. That's a phase.
Yeah, that's a really great question. And the simple answer is no. Autism is a developmental disability. It's a different way of processing information in the brain. So it's not something that people grow out of or change. But I think it really gets back to that question about supports. adults and children with the proper supports can live, wonderful, fulfilling lives. So I think it's really a question of how are we going to support this person knowing that their brain works differently than most of the rest of the people in community. How can we provide the supports that they need to live a full and happy life as well?
Can we talk about the three-prong approach that MAN utilizes to do this amazing work, providing support, education, and then legislative advocacy? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll maybe start with the education piece. When our own family received our autism diagnosis, we really struggled to get the services and supports that we needed for our child. And I will be the first to admit that we came to that process with a lot of privilege. I had worked in the healthcare industry for many, many years. My husband is an attorney. We had all the tools in our toolkit that you can possibly get, but we still really struggled. And so for me, I was always thinking about what does this look like for people that maybe don't speak English as their first language, or maybe aren't comfortable filling out paperwork, or don't understand healthcare system navigation, which can be really complicated. So we try to provide those tools to families to help break this very complicated system down into little pieces that can be understood and comprehended, and to make parents feel more empowered to be part of that process of their child's education and getting those services and support. So that's a very key piece of what we do. The support piece is also really important, because even if you have that education, it still really helps to have someone sitting on your side of the table. It still really helps to know that you're not alone in this process. It still really helps to have someone who's gone through this before that might maybe think of some questions to ask, or might see, where a bridge needs to be built between where the family is and where they need to go to get those services. So that's another really important part of what we do. And then sort of the third leg of that stool is the advocacy piece. And that is knowing and understanding that, even within those systems, there is a lot that needs to be changed. We have great educators and great support networks and a lot of people doing really good work, but there are still huge barriers for families and children to access the services and supports that we need. So we want to make sure those families from diverse communities have a seat at the table. We want to make sure legislators and state agencies understand what this looks like from a family's perspective. So again, our work is really smoothing that path. Maybe 2-3 weeks ago, we brought a group of 8 families to the legislature to meet with a couple of senators who are on the Health and Human Services Committee, just to share their stories and to say, this is what it looks like for me. These are the barriers that I'm facing. These are the things that I would really like to see changed to make this easier for our family and to improve the life of my child. And that's also really important work as well.
What has the support of Governor Walz meant to you and MAN as you guys are navigating all of this amazing work, but also different communities and trying to provide them with resources and information?
Yeah, well, Governor Walz has been, very supportive as an educator for himself. I think he has insight into education systems that many of our people in leadership maybe don't understand. So it's wonderful to have that support. But we also still have a lot of work to do in terms of how we're supporting students with disabilities. We also have a lot of work to do in terms of our Department of Health and our health equities, our service inequities. We know that families in communities of color receive their diagnoses much later. We know that families in communities of color have less access to service. We know that they face more barriers. So there's still a lot of work to be done, but we have a lot of great partners in leadership in the state agency that are deeply committed to that work. So we're grateful for those partnerships, but there's still a lot to be done.
If you could imagine something specific that you did not have when you first began this journey, what would you say it to be?
I think for me, one of the most important things that I did for my child was form friendships with autistic adults. I would say a huge amount of what I have learned about how to support my child has come from people who are autistic themselves and can give me insight into what the world looks like from his perspective. So that is really what I would wish for every parent to have those friendships, to know people who are autistic and are open about it and are willing to, talk about their experience. And that's something, that we're working to do in the communities that we serve. But because of that stigma around disability, a lot of people are still really not comfortable disclosing if they have a diagnosis. So I guess if there's one thing I could do, that would really be it, is, find a friend who is autistic and have a conversation with them, because I have learned so very much, and I know that I'm a better parent and probably a better person because of those friendships.
For those of us that are not neurodivergent, how do we provide support to those in our lives, friends, family, people we work with, and make their experience a little bit easier?
Yeah, another really great question. I think, often if we see a child or an adult who's behaving in a way that might not make sense to us, doing something we might not understand, our first instinct might be to, meet that person with judgment. And I guess I would just ask that we consider kindness and support and curiosity. And if we can do that, we can make people feel so much more included. So that's really what I would ask. And I mean, that's a lesson I'm still learning myself. That's not something that just happens overnight or a switch that we turn on or off, but to really think about how we're meeting people and how we can make people who are maybe not always feeling as included a little bit more welcome.
You've talked a bit about the work MAN does in the public school systems, helping with IEPs and things of that nature. How have you guys seen public school systems provide you support?
Yeah, that's another really great question. There is so much wonderful work that is going on in schools. I mean, there are amazing teachers that are doing fantastic things for students. And the last couple of years with the pandemic have put so much strain on our teachers, our staff, our paras, our administration, and families. So we're coming out of this, incredibly challenging time. We saw during the pandemic a lot of people going kind of to the ends of the earth to try and support students with disabilities. But for a lot of them, distance learning, remote learning just really didn't work very well. Mm-hmm. If there are children with intellectual disabilities or development disabilities that weren't able to work through a screen, if there's families that just don't have technology access or, bandwidth issues, or maybe not able to troubleshoot when things go wrong. So we still have a lot to catch up on during that time. I think, in terms of what schools are doing right now, there are so many people that are really working to listen to autistic adults and learn from what they have to say, kind of shifting our models from, sort of focused on obedience and compliance, and then shifting into models where we're thinking about communication and support and relationship. And that's work that we're really excited to be part of.
It is also Paraprofessional Appreciation Month. So we want to say a very special thank you to all the amazing paraprofessionals that are out there providing support to all of our students in the school systems across this amazing country.
Absolutely. Yeah. Paras often spend more time with our kids than anybody else. So that they're an incredibly important role in our children's lives. And we're grateful for all the work that they do.
For anybody that is trying to navigate a new diagnosis, can you provide just some advice or a bit of encouragement to them to help them continue the fight as they try to provide a safer, happier, and healthier world for their kids?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think my first piece of advice would be you're not alone in this. There's many, many people that have been on this journey before that are really welcoming and trying to reach out and support those families. As I mentioned, I myself was incredibly lucky to have this great network of people that was kind of ready-made. And we try to, make that available to as many families that we can in the language that they're comfortable speaking in the community, in the networks and mosque and school environments that people are already in. So we want to really meet people where they are and provide that support. And then the other piece of it is, I think, again, those relationships with autistic adults have been so incredibly enriching to me. So for families, for professionals, for anyone working with autistic children, seek those autistic adults out, because we have an incredible amount to learn from them, and they are really willing to share their wisdom.
If there was a call to action that you would like to make on the behalf of men, what would that be?
Yeah, a call to action would be, we are always looking for opportunities to partner with other organizations, with educators, with paraprofessionals, with medical providers, with social workers, with different groups, and to have this conversation about how do we support our autistic children. So that would be one, I guess, call is, if you are interested in learning more about how to support autistic children and their families, and especially those families in diverse communities, then please, let's have that conversation. I think the other call would be on an individual level, and just to kind of harken back to what I said before, if you're seeing a child or a family in your mosque, in your community, in your apartment building, in your school, that's maybe behaving in a way that you don't understand, to approach that family again with kindness and support and curiosity. And for us all to take the step of just asking ourselves, what can we do to make this family feel more included?
You talked a bit about partnership, and I know that you guys are partnered with the Awesome Foundation, which is the Autistic Society of Minnesota. Mm-hmm. Can you talk about what that partnership has meant to you and the good people over at Maine?
Yeah, we have amazing partnership with the Autism Society of Minnesota, or Awesome. We have been partnering with them for a number of different years on a number of community inclusion projects and family support projects and cultural accessibility projects. And the Autism Society has been around for a very long time, so they have deep roots in this community in terms of services and supports, and a number of autistic adults, running the organization now, which is also a really welcome community and a group of people from whom we can learn a tremendous amount. So we partner with them on, on trainings, on services, on support, on some of our legislative activities, and they've been just a tremendous partner. We're working on one project with them right now, in addition to Children's Minnesota, about serving autistic children and their families in the process of getting vaccines. And it's just been an incredible partnership, and I think has really made a difference in the lives of those children and their families. Just really rethinking the way that we serve those communities, and what tools can we bring, what knowledge can we bring about how to make what is often a really challenging and difficult experience feel a little less frightening for those folks.
For those of us that want to stay connected to the amazing work you guys are doing over at MAN, can you provide us with your social media handles, your email address?
Yeah. So you can look us up as the Multicultural Autism Action Society on social media. Our website is www.mann.org. And we also do a lot through video on our YouTube channel. We have a lot of informational videos for parents in Somali and Oromo language, so that's a great place to learn more as well.
Is there anything, before I let you go, that you would love to highlight?
Oh, let's see. I think I just want to highlight the wonderful work of the founders of this organization. As I mentioned, I started off as a volunteer shortly after the organization was founded, but it is an incredible group of women that brought this organization based on the need that they saw in their community. And their wisdom, their knowledge, and their commitment to improving the lives of autistic children and their families is really an inspiration to me, and something from what I have learned so much. So I'm really grateful to them, and pleased to have this opportunity to talk to you about it. So thank you.
Absolutely. For anyone that wants to volunteer, can you let us know where you are located?
Sure. We are located in Columbia Heights. We also do some work out of the Cedar Riverside area, the Brian Coyle Center. But we also serve families throughout the metro and throughout the state. So we will come where families are as well.
Unfortunately, that is all the time that we have for today's episode. A very special thank you to Maren Christensen Hoffer and her amazing team over at MAN, and a very special thank you to Mark Holmberg over at Awesome. I hope something that was said or done today that you have found educational and helps improve the life of somebody in your life that is autistic and/or neurodivergent. Thank you for joining us on another episode of Community Connection. As always, I am Anna Orr, and I look forward to connecting again with you soon.